I offer this welcome on behalf of Greg Peterson, the founder and perennial host of the Turner Winter Series these many years. We welcome with delight those of you who are with us today in the comfort of the Kappa Theater here in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as those who are enjoying this program virtually. It is my great pleasure to begin our program with a brief introduction of our guest, Marcy O'Brien, after which I will turn the conversation over to Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Marcy O'Brien is an award-winning humorist, human interest newspaper columnist, feature article writer for significant nationally syndicated publications, and a published book author, all of which she calls her career number 7. Her earlier 6 careers were in the varied realms of serving many years as one of the very early glamorous stewardesses for American Airlines, teaching business courses at Alfred State College in New York, spending a few decades in designer fashion, interior design, and small business ownership, and as the executive director of a busy historic theater in her adopted hometown of Warren, Pennsylvania. Marcy is obviously a Renaissance woman, and we are blessed to have her with us now to share her enormously interesting journey, which might give us a glimpse into career number 8. This is going to be fun. And so, it is now my great pleasure to welcome Marcy O'Brien in conversation with Greg Peterson.
Marcy O'Brien, welcome to the Robert H. Jackson Center. So, I have in my hands a book, right here, Ed, if you can see that, Rounding Third, and of course you'll see it's high heels, baseball, funny, and the back of the book says, Rounding Third captures memories that create a universal joy of family and life. Each story is a hug from the heart and a laugh with a good friend. Marcy O'Brien is worth spending time with. I agree. So we are going to spend time with you today.
Thank you.
But writing was just as sort of well down the road for you as an avocation.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yes.
So tell me, where does it all begin? Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Well, that's a mixed story. My parents got married during the Depression for the wrong reason. My mother had a difficult life. Her mother died when my mother was 6, and she was the oldest of 4. And my grandfather had no idea what to do with them, so they all got split up, fostered out, into the foster system. And then she got saved by being placed at Canterbury Shaker Village in New Hampshire. And she lived with the Shakers, the most successful communitarian organization ever, but different, off the grid, from 11 to 18. So she came down to Boston when she finally left there, and with no skills for the outside, and particularly no social skills. And she met my father at a church dance, and they dated, and he kept complaining that he couldn't get a job. And in those days, in the late 30s, there were no jobs, except for married men. And he finally complained one night and said, if I were only married, he said, I could get a job. They're giving jobs to married men. She said, well, we could do that if it would help. And they did. And 3 years later, I was born, but 3 difficult years. Marriage didn't work, and for lots of reasons. And I was just not quite 4 when the split came. So from then on, it was my mother and I. And so she was on her own. His family had decided they would wash their hands, sadly of me too. I was their oldest grandchild, but they didn't believe their son was capable of the things that he had done. So I lost grandparents and my dad,
Yeah.
which was sad. But my mother was a tough woman who said, no, I'm going to do this, we're going to be fine. And she worked 2 full-time jobs for 15 years till I entered college. And lots of interesting little jobs I had along the way, and lots of alone time. I had enormous amount of time alone.
When you're alone, does your imagination take hold?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But we also, we lived in an apartment, a second floor of a house, large house, and it was very cold. The family downstairs had 4 little boys and dinners cooking every day, and just me upstairs, and it was always 58 degrees. My mother tried to raise Cain with him, but the house wasn't up to it. So I spent a lot of time in the library. It was warm. So I would leave school, go home, grab a snack, and head downtown, and just go directly to the corner in front of the radiator and sit on the floor and read.
Wow.
And that's what I did.
Fiction, nonfiction, what drove you?
Was a little kid?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it was all fiction. I mean, isn't Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys and all of that? Yeah. Yeah. I started that way.
So you, by choice, but also by circumstances, you became a reader.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember the book The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford, which was a biography of the royal family girls. And I think the library thought they owned it. But once they got it, I checked it out, and I brought it back, checked it in, usually a week late, counting out my pennies. And then before I left, I checked it out again, and it was in my possession for 2 or 3 years, I think. I memorized it, because I was going to be the 3rd daughter. I was going to be in the royal family. You talk about imagination, right?
So this is where are you growing up? Where's your adolescence?
Massachusetts. Stoughton, Mass. was 18 miles south of Boston.
Okay.
And the orientation was always Boston to do anything important.
So this is Ted Williams' time period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
So
Yeah.
was this Splendid Splinter
The
your
Splendid
guy?
Splinter. Yes, he was. He was my hero. In fact, this will hurt you. I had a Ted Williams autograph ball.
Oh, you're right.
And I had it in my glove, my fielder's glove from the softball years, and I had it wrapped so that it would stay tight with some leather in the back hall closet. But my son was a curiosity seeker, found it, and I found it after 3 or 4 days of rain, sitting in a puddle, totally ruined, and about the size of a softball.
Yeah, they do explode, yeah.
Yeah, and that broke my heart. But, oh, hey, it was my son, and he was trying to play ball, so, you know. But, yeah, that was the era.
So you are a Red Sox fan, and so you lived through a lot, having lost a lot.
Oh, yes, yes. I was not in Boston when they finally won, but my daughter left here, went to college in Boston and stayed, and they were dyed-in-the-wool fans. And the night that they won, I talked to her on the phone, and she opened the window. She lives about, 10 or 12 blocks from Fenway, and you could hear the city roaring through the telephone. It was amazing, really amazing. Yeah.
Well, they have that song. It's this rock and roll song, with Charles, love that dirty water, Boston, you're my home. They sing that whenever they win.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it was the only, by the way, that's the only song that group ever got a #1 hit, or any hit. It was a one-hit wonder, but it embraced.
Okay.
We completely digress.
Yes.
Yeah. So did you graduate from high school there in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what year?
And I went to Boston University, 59.
59. So then you went to BU?
Yep.
Was that a natural decision for you to go to BU?
No, I was lost. I had a bunch of scholarships which indicated that I should go there. And I kept trying to find the right major, and I didn't belong there. I really didn't. And I just couldn't home in on everything I was interested in. I couldn't figure out how I could make a living at it. So I left flailing and backed into the airline job.
Well, let's talk about that because, you know, of late, PBS, you know, you've probably seen the stewardesses or whatever it's called, you know, talks about you. And, you know, because as I was reading, because you have some stories about that, and one we'll talk about in just a second. So tell me how you backed into that.
I had a roommate that I worked with in the summer in Cape Cod, always between college years. And she desperately wanted to be a stewardess. She was very pretty. And she wanted to go to the interview. When they announced them, they hold them in hotel rooms, suites, you know. And she didn't want to go alone. She was too frightened. And I said, I'll go with you. Yeah. So off we go. And I thought, well, as long as I'm going, I might as well put on a dress and heels and whatever. And I walk into the room of all these beautiful, personable young women, and I start reading the brochures, and I'm thinking, boy, I never thought of this. This sounds like fun. And so I went in for the interview itself, and I was 5'9" or 9.5. And he said, how tall are you? And I said, 5. I told him, and he said, didn't you read that it was United Airlines, that our height limit is 5'8"? And I said, I did. He said, well, then what are you doing here? Are you stupid? And I said, no, I just thought maybe you'd relax it or it would have changed or whatever. He said, no. That was the end of that. Now I was intrigued, so I found out that both American and TWA hired at 5'9". So that was the plan, and I applied to both, got hired by both, and chose American.
So you chose American, and I'm reading an article of most recently from the Post-Journal, of which you are a syndicated journalist, Early Travels with the King.
Oh, yes, last week, yeah.
And Elvis Presley boarded my airline twice. So let's talk about, not everybody meets the King.
I wasn't a huge fan, so that was interesting. But
this would have been what time period? Early 60s?
Yes, mid-60s.
Mid-60s, okay.
Mid-60s. Yeah, because I think I was, and once in the late 60s. Yeah. So, the reason I enjoyed it was because he's a nice guy. Yeah. Or he was then. I mean, I think he got preyed upon by a lot of the wrong people, and he was in a tough business, let's face it. I mean, how many people get into that as deeply as he did and the skyrocketing fame and survive it? I don't know. But he was a very sweet guy and very well-mannered. Like I said in the article, his mama did a good job, you know. He was very nice to me, but he traveled with this posse of jerks, you know, and he took them everywhere. And I did a lot of research like I do on everything because I try not to make misstatements. And he didn't have a lot of money when he died. I mean, the estate has earned gazillions since, but he didn't have a lot, and they said one of the reasons was the amount of money he spent on the tag-alongs that he traveled with everywhere. He fed them, housed them, you know, they were with him.
Well, plus Elvis was in first class. You were waiting on him in first class. That means you were in the hierarchy of stewardesses, high on the totem.
No, I just like to fly first class. And although somebody once reminded me the airplanes don't crash tail first, Marcy. They're really safer in the back. But I was airsick for years starting out, and the tail swayed. So as soon as my seniority could hold first class, that's what I wanted.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I was airsick for the first 3 years. It was not fun.
What a great... So what's most important for me in my bad habits is Elvis stretched his legs after breakfast. Ma'am, is it possible to get a Dr. Pepper, please? Are you kidding me? The King and me are the only ones that really enjoy Dr. Pepper.
I think so. We didn't carry it on American.
Yeah.
No.
So tell me, so you're on American, now you had quite a career there.
I did, actually. They were a very, very benevolent employer.
Yeah.
I was thrilled to work for them. I flew out of New York for 4 years and then to Los Angeles. I got married while I was in New York and moved to San Diego, and then I commuted to LA. Then we went to Cambridge for graduate school for my husband, and while I transferred to Boston, we had a crew base there, and he could only apply to graduate schools where we had crew bases. So that, but fortunately, all the good grad schools were, in the right cities. And I became a stewardess supervisor there, and when we left there after 2 years, I got a job at corporate. And as did he. He left to become the assistant to the treasurer of Pan Am, and I left to go to flight service staff at American Airlines. And then, after I had my first child, we had finally won the court case, the class action, and we won that for marriage, and then for children, and then for age, and then for weight. I guess that all came after me. But I went back after my first child because we wanted to buy a house.
Okay.
So I went back and flew international for another 3 years.
And you had seniority.
Yeah, I did, because I kept all that seniority while I was not flying.
Yeah.
And so I was able to do some, I started in the South Pacific, but I was gone too long from my baby. And so I just flew Caribbean and Mexico, that kind of thing.
Caribbean, yeah.
Yeah.
So, were there some humorous incidents as an airline stewardess? I mean, I realize seeing celebrities, Elvis, that's a good one.
Oh, yeah, lots of celebrities. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. We had some very irreverent ground agents who were bad boys. I think of things that I should have been in trouble for that I didn't.
Statute of limitations is run, so you can talk about it.
A woman boarded with her son, and they were sitting in like the second or third row of coach, and he was one of those sullen teenagers with a mohawk, and he had a rainbow-colored 6-inch high mohawk, shaved on the side, in every color you could think of. And I looked at him, and then I looked at her, just saying hello, and she went, if you believe this, she rolled the eyes, and I just nodded and smiled. And they sat down, and he got in first, and he was sitting beside the window seat. And it bothered him. He said, the curve here, he said, I can't get my hair up straight. And he said, I want to sit in the middle seat. She said, no, just sit there, we're not moving. Oh, he was very unhappy. And so finally he fell asleep before we started the beverage service. And that's all the flight was just beverages and snacks. So I started with this cart and got to their row, and she took a Coke. And I said, did you want anything else? And she said, no. And I said, you think your parrot wants a Coke? And she looked and she said, no, I don't think I want to wake him. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm going to be fired before I get home. I mean, if the word of this gets out,
yeah,
but sometimes it's just there on the tip of your tongue and out it came, right? We had the New York San Juan flights on the 747s. We had always full flights, and they left at dinner time. And there were daytime flights. I flew the nighttime usually, but this one, we were coming back from San Juan, and in those days when we first had 747s, we had piano lounges, one in first class and one in coach, and anybody could sit down and play it.
Piano.
And people did. It was nice, and there was room around them. You could gather with drinks and stand up, and like a lounge. So I was coming from first class just checking, and I usually like to look as I go through, because I heard some noise back there. And then as soon as I got into coach, it was crazy. It was screaming, and I heard these foreign, like animal noises. I get back to the piano lounge, and there's 4 guys on their knees with huge piles of money and 2 fighting cocks that they had brought on board in shopping bags. And in those days, we used to kid about those flights that they would bring on the matching the luggage, you know, the shopping bags from all over San Juan. And these shopping bags had fighting cocks in them. They wouldn't have gotten through TSA today. Wow. And there was blood squirting on the walls and up in the air, and they're screaming in Spanish, and I don't understand a word of it. And the Spanish speaker that was working that day was so timid, she didn't have any sway with them at all. And they wouldn't listen to me, so I went back at the captain, and they listened to him.
What do you do with 2 beat-up chickens?
Yeah, well...
It's a cockfight.
Yeah, it was a cockfight, absolutely. So we put the 2 of them in shopping bags and into one of the lavatories and just left them there, let them stay there until the FBI met the plane in San Juan.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but
That put a damper on other activity in the lavatory, too.
yeah, but a 747 has a lot of lavatories, so it wasn't too bad, really. It was a crazy in the telling of it later on, though. I flew with a guy named Ed Gold from Brooklyn, who was, and this is after American acquired Trans-Caribbean Airlines. So they had a lot of stewards, and American didn't want male flight attendants. So they offered them all a lot of money, but they didn't all take it. They wanted a more career. I don't blame them. And Ed was a very funny, very crazy guy. And flying with him was risky, because you never knew what he was going to say. And one day we were serving prime rib, carving prime rib on the cart in first class. And we would make Caesar salad from scratch. I mean, the whole thing was very, very lovely. And he was carving the roast beef, and I was serving wine or whatever. And he hit the carving fork, and 3/4 of the roast beef hit the floor. And he reached down with the fork and picked it up and said, Mrs. O'Brien, would you please take this to the galley and get the other roast beef? And I'm facing the passengers, and I'm trying to keep a straight face, you know, it's just like, yes, sir, Mr. Gold, absolutely. And I took the fork with this big prime rib on it, and of course, it's it. I mean, we don't have spare prime ribs sitting in the galley, and this thing has hair and grit and stuff on it, and fortunately, we had we always had a whole coffee pot full of au jus. So we just took some of that out and rubbed it off as much as I could and rolled it in the au jus and put a lot of parsley around it and put it on another platter and took it up to oh my God. I just thought, I hope none of them bite into something that wasn't supposed to be there. It's just...
That's really quick thinking.
Well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there isn't another one. You're up there, and that's all you've got. You can't pull over to a little service station and pick up what you need. It's just not going to happen. So.
Well, being one of those very attractive stewardesses, did you feel at all? Were there passengers that sort of did what sometimes passengers do? You know, making passes and doing things like that? Did you?
There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
One of the very first charters I ever flew, I was based in New York, but they used us instead of the Buffalo flight attendants because of the aircraft. They weren't qualified on it. So we flew up from New York. We headed to here to fly the Bills to Houston.
Huh?
And there were a couple of men in the back who were supporters and who had paid for the flight and all this. And Cookie Gilchrist was on board. I don't know if any of you remember him. And Jack Kemp was the quarterback, of course. And Jack sat in the back quietly reading a military biography, if I remember. And all the guys were up front, and they're loud, and they're raucous, and they're carrying on. We were trying to get them to sit down to have lunch. And one of them was very insistent that he was going to be part of my life. And I said, I really need you to sit down. Do you think possibly we could just do this so we could serve lunch? No, no, he was very insistent and very physically pushy, and I was getting more and more uncomfortable. Cookie Gilchrist, God bless him, whose mother also did a wonderful job, walked up to him and tapped him on the shoulder. Of course, he was enormous.
You big guy.
He was enormous. He was like the refrigerator, right? And he tapped him and said, "I think the lady said she'd like you to sit down." So he did, and I had less trouble with them. But then, going to the back, I had problems with the businessmen owners.
Yeah.
We're serving them cocktails at their seats, and one of them puts his hand between my legs and said, "I'd like you to remove your hand, please, sir," he said. And he moved it up, and up to the middle of my thighs. And I said, "Sir, I need you to," and I can't physically touch him. I'm not supposed to. And he said, "We bought this airplane and everything on it." And I thought, that is how some people see us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, but when you're 21 and 22 years old, you learn very rapidly how to deal with those things. And there are those people out there. Interestingly, Greg, I never met a salesman, a man who was trying to impress me. Every single one of them was a national sales manager. None of them were ever just sales manager. I said, "Really? National? Wow, that's a big job. Can I have your card?" "Oh, I think I'm out of them." Yeah, they never had those, no.
Did you stewardesses sort of talk among yourselves?
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
Did you watch the PBS special?
Oh, yeah.
Did you recognize some of that?
Couple?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew Dusty Rhodes.
Did you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, she was a great lady. I was lucky in that we did not know it was the golden age of aviation.
Yeah.
I wish somebody told us. It was fun. What we also did not know was we were so interested in having the job and what it meant that we didn't realize what we were to the airlines. And I started to realize it when they moved us out of flight service to marketing, and I thought, wait a minute, what's that about? We're supposed to be about safety and passenger comfort. No, marketing. And that's when the billboards started, like, "Hi, I'm Nancy, fly me." Hello? And that was, it got a little difficult there for a while. They took us from the girl next door, and when they hired us in the era I was hired, that's what they wanted, the girl next door, not somebody painted, not somebody dyed blonde, not just warm, friendly, smiley. That's what we were supposed to be. And, we had rules. The hair had to be just so, it had to be a half an inch above the collar, no fasteners or anything. Everything from makeup to weight to nail polish, it was all prescribed. And perfection at all times. And then 6 or 8 years later, they're putting us into false eyelashes and knee-high go-go boots and capes, and it was crazy. So
You left that job at some point. Was that hard?
it was horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was 32, and I was the last person to take the age payout. When we signed on, we signed that we would leave before our 33rd birthday.
Okay.
We were considered all washed up at 32. And that was the job parameter. So I was having to quit because my husband took a job transfer to Wellsville, New York, which is a small, teeny little town about 100 miles east of here, I guess. And I could not see commuting to Kennedy, which is where I was based. A lot of people commuted great distances, but I had a difficult short distance to get. I'd have to get to Buffalo to get to Kennedy. Well, there's that drive to Buffalo from December to March, and then there's the flights out of Buffalo with 2 children now, and it just didn't add up. I made a pro and con list, and the con list was the same length as the pro list, and I thought, no, I wish I'd stayed. I was 12 years, and it was a year or 2 later, while I was still there, that I read that American Airlines had just granted any employee 15 years of of longevity or more lifetime passes. If I had known, I'd have found a way. Somehow, I'd have stayed, yeah. It was too good a deal.
Yeah.
Greg, they buy the clothes you work in. At my seniority, I worked 8 or 9 days a month. Had all the time in the world off. All those free trips, I mean, I had as many passes as I wanted, and my husband and my children.
Sure.
And I just thought, oh. So it was the world's best job for a working mother. Of course, the reaction when we went back to work after I had my first child, the worst ones were the pilots. We'd be in operations. I hear you have a kid. I said, yes, I have a baby girl. What are you doing here? I said, actually, I was coming to work just to, help with the family. And he said, you belong at home. And I said, what do you do with the baby? And I said, well, I tie her to a tree and pray it doesn't rain. And I said, is your wife allowed out of the house? Yeah. Well, what happens when she leaves the house? We get a babysitter. I said, really? That's a new idea. I said, I do that too occasionally when, she escapes from being tied to the tree. They were really awful. Yeah. So they didn't like it. They wanted their single girls back there. Right. So they got used to it. They got over it.
But at what age now? You're sort of out of the business, and you still in Wellsville at the time you end that airline avocation?
I was on maternity leave. Huh. And I was all set to go back and figured out it wasn't going to work.
Is that when you sort of entered into the wild world of Alfred State?
Yeah. I taught the 4
years. That's not too far away.
The 4 years we lived there, I taught there, yeah.
What'd you teach?
I taught in the business curriculum all the soft skills. And they really needed somebody for that. And I got offered that job at a cocktail party, so, well, okay then. Yeah, that was fun. And the problem was we moved in October to Warren, and I had signed a contract for 1 more year, so I had to go every week back, but it was only 1 day, except it was December and January and February and March. And
so you and Tom came to Warren. What drew you to Warren?
He was recruited for a job in Warren. So I had said, whither thou goest, but after a while, the constant moving, and we decided we really wanted to go back to New England. He loved it. He'd never lived there, and he liked it a lot, and we thought we'd go back, but I looked at Warren, and it was 3 times bigger than Wellsville, and I thought, well, it's pretty. Everybody I've met's nice. I could live here, but a sentence of 2 to 4, that's it. After that, I'm out of here. That was 46 years ago. Yeah.
Well, and
we fell in love, yeah.
When you made a great impact. In Wellsville, did you ever have they had their famous hot dogs there in Texas?
Oh, the Texas Hot?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. We lived there. Saturday morning breakfast, always.
Greek hot dogs, by the way. Greek.
It's like Johnny dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did your paths cross through the Reguses at all?
They lived 2 doors from me.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, not the older Regus who owned, but his son, Jim, and Demi. Yeah. They lived 2 doors down. And then, of course, he wound up with the business. So, yeah.
Adelphia.
Yeah.
Well, we could go down a rabbit hole there. Maybe off camera we'll do that. So Alfred State, and then your bio says spent a few decades in designer fashion, interior design, and small business ownership. Yeah. This is another career.
That was 2 or 3, actually. Yeah. The fashion thing I used to sit on the jump seat and read the New Yorker. And there was a panel ad in the side of the New Yorker for Doncaster custom designer clothes. And I thought, that looks very elegant. I thought I'm going to check that out someday. But I was never in one place long enough to do it. And I didn't know enough people of obvious means. You could tell by reading the ad that, this wasn't discount. And so I checked on it and thought, that sounds interesting. And while I was thinking about it in Wellsville, my next door neighbor became a Doncaster representative. So I got to see what she did with it. And then I did after about a year and a half in Warren. And we bought an old house, a very old house, and gutted half and put 2 additions on it. And by the time we finally got settled in, I'd met enough people, I thought, to maybe start out. So I did that for 19 years. And then...
Did you have a storefront, too?
No. It's all done in the home.
Oh, wow.
A week at a time, you turn your house into a boutique. It's by invitation only.
Oh, yeah.
And you answer the door, take their coat, and serve coffee, tea, or sherry, depending on the time of day. And that I did very well. I mean, national sales, I got the trip every other year,
Wow.
to corporate. And then I bought one of my suppliers. I didn't just do it for Doncaster. I figured I'm opening my home for this. I saw 2 or 3 other things I would like to have available. So I did that. So I bought a lingerie and leisure wear company from a friend who did trunk shows. And she had 48 agents, and I was one of them.
Oh, fantastic.
And then, unfortunately, I got too enthusiastic. So I networked it a little bit, and in a couple of years, I had 300 sales agents in 30 states, and it became very labor-intensive. And my kids were young, and they grew up with it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I also became a kitchen and bath designer. My husband bought into a business, and I did not want to do this, but I'd done a halfway decent job on our house, I guess, and the guy that sold us the kitchen wanted to hire me, and I said, I have little children, I can't do that. Well, he was persistent, and then he wanted Tom for the business half of his business, and so I went to school, learned how to do that, and did that in interiors for quite a while, alongside the other thing. Kept me off the streets and out of trouble.
Well, you said in your bio about the author, it is yet to be determined whether these varied endeavors are the result of a low threshold of boredom or the next step up for the inquisitive, downright nosy. Probably both.
Yeah, very. Yeah. I just want to know everything about everything, I think.
Well, one thing you probably didn't know that much about was, in fact, being the executive director of the theater.
That's right.
And that's how our paths started
Yep.
to cross.
Yeah.
And you're a force of nature. Let me just say it and get out of the way. Because I've been told by Judge Morgan, he was a trustee of that theater, which was in somewhat disrepair. And they needed to do something. And maybe you could tell the rest of the story, because it's your story.
Well, when they asked me, the retired treasurer of one of the companies at Warren was the executive director. And they were just trying to stop the bleeding because it was in a lot of trouble financially. And he was not a theater person, and he didn't want anything to do with that. He was just there to watch the bottom line. And he wanted out. He'd been there a couple of years, and he said, this place needs, an injection of energy, I guess. And my husband had just died, and I realized I needed to work. And I said to him, that's nice, but I've been a theater buff all my life, but all I know is about the ticket and the seat and what I see. I don't know a lot about running a theater. I can't do that. He said, but you're a small business and operations person. I said, yeah. He said, it's a small business, Marcy, with a different language. And I thought, well, maybe that's true, because I've always said that you can do a lot of things if you just learn the language. So I did. And I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, and history of the theater. And
The name of the theater is?
the Struthers Library Theater.
Okay.
The 1883 Struthers Library Theater, the 18th oldest legitimate theater in the country. And the previous iterations did not involve a lot of fundraising. I mean, membership, yes. But we'd had people coming to town trying to make Warren a tourist town. Well, I sat there one day in my office and I was looking out at the theater, and it's 45,000 square feet, the building. And that old a building, it's a lot to stay on top of. But I'm looking at this building that was by then in pretty good shape, and I thought, we need to do something to open this place and keep it alive. So I started raising some money from corporate people, and I did something really silly, but it worked. I never called anybody. I made an appointment and went to see them. Because I think when you're asking somebody for money, you should look them in the eye. I really do. And it seemed to work. And by the time I was going the second year and adding people on and returning to some of they knew why I was coming. Nobody said no. I mean, so gradually we started out with one act. I said to the trustees, if you'll let me roll the dice once on a famous name that we could afford, maybe, maybe we can start something and then add to it. So starting to find famous names that we could afford was tricky. And we actually, oh my gosh, I have forgotten her name. She was Carol Burnett's sister, the sidekick. What's her name?
Vicki Lawrence.
Vicki Lawrence, thank you very much. So we got Vicki Lawrence to come, and she was doing a show called Mama and Me. And first half was Vicki, as Vicki, telling all her stories and humor. The second half was she came out as Mama, you know, that character she had. And she was a delight, an absolute delight. And she traveled with her husband. The Mama and Me, we booked her for Mother's Day weekend and advertised it as a perfect Mother's Day gift, so it was Saturday night, and we sold it out. And there's 930 seats at the time. So I thought, wow, wait a minute. So the next year the trustees were very pleased. The next year we did 2, raised some more money. By year 7, we had 6 or 7 acts. Before he did his bad boy stuff, or maybe while he was doing his bad boy stuff, we had Bill Cosby. But he came on a Sunday afternoon, and of course it was oversold, practically. We did almost all sellouts for the big names. We had lots and lots of country, which I found out just by listening to the radio. I went up and down the dial and thought, oh my God, 3/4 of what's on this radio dial is country, because I'm not tuned into that, and yet, you know, let's listen to what people are listening to. So we started invading country territory, and we brought the Gatlin brothers and Diamond Rio and Loretta Lynn and her little sister, Crystal Gale, Tanya Tucker, Keith Black, Clint Black it was, and just a lot more, and they all sold out. Loretta Lynn was funny. She's a dear lady. She'd had to cancel on us one year, and because her doctor took her off the road, because her schedule was too punishing. So they did honor us and booked us the following year. So she came. She stayed on her bus, you know, they're rolling palaces, until 10 minutes before the show. Usually the crew all eats and they get taken care of before. And when she walked out, she had on a dress that looked like a prom queen's dress. It was about this wide, you know. Of course, I realized she never had that life. Loretta Lynn got married at, what, 14 or 15? Yeah. She didn't get to go to her prom. So here she is in this lavender prom dress and with a black push-up bra, which I thought was funny. And she walked in, and I walked over to her, and I said, "It's nice to see you, Miss Lynn." Shook her hand, and she's a teeny little lady. I mean, and she said to me, "Marcy, are you a grandmother?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Good, we're going to talk." So she had her guys pull 2 chairs over in the wings and let them start the show, and we talked for 3 numbers, and then she decided she was going to go out and sing.
Oh
So, but she has a son who travels with her, and maybe I'll pass on the story. Okay.
But that's not the only way you raised money. I mean, you were a serious fundraiser.
Yes.
I mean, you.
Oh, well, then we went out and raised $3 million.
Yeah, I mean, let's not lose track of that. That's
No.
serious money.
Yeah, we did $1.25 million the first time, and I was fixated because that was our 125th anniversary on the number 125. So I think $1,250,000, that we should be able to do something with that. But we needed everything. We needed a sound system. We needed a lighting system. We needed new curtains. We desperately needed carpets and seats and the works. Plus, we were not ADA compliant. So the first time we built 2 handicap sections in the back of the theater that are like box seats. They're just wonderful. We did that, but the second go-round, we were members of the League of Historic American Theaters, and that we hadn't done that before, and that was really important to our effort because I got to meet people and network with other theater executives and what's going on and what's possible. And the other people that go to those conferences every year are architects and designers and theater suppliers, carpeting and seats and the works. And I made friends with an architect early on. At lunch one day, we started drawing on a napkin and where to put an elevator in a building like that. And I thought I wanted to keep it inside to avoid an extra exterior building. But there was no place without totally destroying what we already had. So we added on a glass and brick elevator tower to the side of the theater. It was a long time coming. And we changed an 18-foot canvas marquee to a 42-foot glass and steel marquee that's lighted and heated.
Wow.
And has a glass ceiling so that you can look up to the front of the theater and the lights. It's really spectacular and protects a ton more people in the weather because people line up to go in. And so, and we also did all the seats. We replaced them. And we put a lift in. The Struthers Library Theater is named because it started as a library. And there's a big library room that's still extant and used as a function room for weddings and parties and so forth. But it was inaccessible for grandmothers of the bride. And once we had an important personage come to speak, and we couldn't get him to the second floor. And it was terrible. And I thought, we've got to do something about this. So we built it, the elevator got them now to all 4 floors, and yet we still had to get to that half floor up in that room. So there was a very nice lift put in there, supported downstairs. And now everybody can go everywhere in the building.
And the Robert Jackson Center has been the beneficiary of a couple of those things because we did the library.
Right.
We had a Robert Jackson impersonation one night.
Yes.
And then the most important thing is, I think it was around the 125th, but we had the world premiere of the movie on Robert Jackson at your place.
Yes.
Where we had all kinds of notables from Jackson's life there, including grandchildren and prosecutors and biographers and people like that. So thank you. I mean, we worked glove in hand with you to make your Robert Jackson out of Warren a reality. So.
Yeah.
But it was all during that time.
And the very last thing, I retired in 2018, and the last wonder was we won the National Theater of the Year award that year. And we tried 2 or 3 times, but it all came together in terms of our construction, our school, our academy, the number of types of things that we had there, the compliance with the ADA, and our programming. It all came together. So
The National Historic Theater of the Year
yes,
Award.
yes,
Congratulations.
it was wonderful. We went to Austin for that, and it was grand.
Well, you'll be going soon to Ohio to get another award.
Yeah.
Right in the Post-Journal recently, and Warren Times Observer, and everything else locally. Marcy O'Brien of Warren took first in the Global Human Interest category with Heart and Soul, which is part of the 2024 Irma Bombeck Writing Competition.
Right.
And what an honor.
I'm
And
thrilled.
that's a
I am
segue
thrilled.
into
Absolutely.
another career,
Yeah,
writing,
yeah.
and which led to this. We
Yeah.
finally get to this, folks. You're so fascinating. So how did that happen? I know you it didn't happen overnight, but was that always in the background that you would like, hopefully have the time, you always refer to that as your in dotage, but
Yes.
time to write? Was that always in the background?
No,
No?
not until I was secretary of the Warren Shakespeare Club.
Ah,
And the problem was, dear friends, the Wendells, I don't know, did you know Jack and Marion Wendell? Okay, he was a former English professor at Princeton. And he was the secretary for 2 years. And then they announced that I was going to be this. And I thought, oh my gosh, follow him? Are you kidding me? I mean, because he was witty and poetic and fun. And I thought, oh dear God, how can I do this? And so I started out, I started spending 2 and 3 hours just to write the minutes of the previous week's meeting, to make them interesting and clever and all of that. And I thought, hey, this is fun. As I got into it, I realized there was a lot more to it than just writing. And then I decided to go to Chautauqua in the summers, and I went for 5 summers to the Chautauqua writing classes. And the nice thing is, the 9 subjects cover a wide variety of writing disciplines, so I would pick 2 or 3 each year that would help me. And that helped me polish the things. And in the meantime, I'd sold some pieces to some features to some important newspapers and magazines, and got lucky with that. And
how does that happen, by the way? You mean,
Right.
you write an essay or you write something you think it's worth it, but you're not sure whether it is worth it, are they?
I think writers are terribly insecure. I know I am.
Well, you said, and I'm reading this, you've written feature articles for the Boston Globe, Sunday Magazine, the Washington Post, the Pittsburgh Post, the Yankee Magazine, Shipmate Magazine, the Chautauquan, and so on. You just float it out there? How does it work?
Well, you're supposed to send a query letter.
Ah.
That's the formal way that writers, and I'm getting one ready to send to a magazine soon, because I haven't done that in a long time. But the Boston Globe magazine, I had an article that was banging around in my head for years. I thought, if I ever do write, I have to write about this first. It was something that happened on a flight. I was flying to St. Thomas, St. Croix and back, and they called that a turnaround. And the international crew was New York. Boston flew it down to New York, and then we got on. Well, there was 8 or 10 people coming from Boston going through to St. Thomas and St. Croix. So you take the seating chart and make sure that they're where they're supposed to be and meet them, say hello, greet them. And there was an older couple, maybe they were late 50s, 60s, and they weren't dressed in party clothes. And he did not look like he belonged in a suit. He was an outdoorsman, I could tell. And she was a very sweet grandmotherly look, and she was dressed in something a grandmother of the bride might wear to a wedding, like a silk dress. And I thought, what's with them? I don't know. So, you see a lot of people, you can figure things out early. So I started chatting with them, and it turns out they were apple farmers from Lunenburg, Massachusetts. And I thought, I've never been there. So we chatted about that, and I told them about my love for McCown apples and how hard they were to find. And So we chatted about that, and I said, so what takes you to the islands today? Well, we're going to get our son. And I said, oh, is he ill? And they said, no, he was murdered yesterday. Oh, I mean, you're supposed to be really cool. And all my cool just left. I mean, it was devastated for them. And so I started asking questions about, what have you done for what's going to happen at the other end? All they did was call American Airlines and buy tickets to go. Their son was the greenskeeper at the Fountain Valley Country Club. And some natives, there was a lot of native unrest during that era. And I'd gotten to know the couple of the customs people because it was a regular route for me. And they were starting talking about transfers. And I said, really, is it that bad? Oh, it's not good. Well, 4 or 5 of them opened fire with automatic weapons and killed 8 people on the Fountain Valley Golf Course. And 4 of them were tourists, and 2 of them were locals, and 2 were employees of the club. And their son was a 23-year-old greenskeeper, married with 2 very little children, and lived there. So he was their youngest child. And they did not know what they were going into. They'd never been there. They didn't know what kind of shape she would be in. All I knew was she was alone with these 2 babies. And so I went to the captain and I said, we have to do something. And the radios are only supposed to be used for airline business. You just can't ask people to do this. I said, we have to do something. And we all knew the station manager, John, in St. Thomas, who took care of both islands, and said, can we talk to John and tell him what we've got on our hands and what he's going to have to start looking to do? So we did that. And I handed them off to him. He met the plane. And it was heartbreaking to me. I just, was devastated. And it lived with me. And that fall, it became a fall, then apple season, and I just kept thinking about them and worrying about them and wondering about them. And the newspapers had things in them about the criminal cases and so forth that followed it up. And on Christmas Eve, I had the whole family at our house in Connecticut, and the doorbell rang after dark. And it was the UPS man, and I said, what are you doing? It's Christmas Eve. He said, I don't know, you're my last one, I'm heading home. And I said, okay. He hands me this big white plastic styrofoam box. I thought, what's this? I don't know anything like this. And I think, well, maybe it's a gift from somebody. So I opened it up, and inside were 24 polished Macau apples, each wrapped in green tissue, each in a slot, and then another layer of them. I was devastated. I mean, I just knelt down beside them and just sobbed. I thought, here these people are with possibly the worst Christmas of their life. Sure. It has to be. And the other thing was, how did they find me? I guess I might have mentioned I lived in Connecticut, but American Airlines was very, very private with their crews' whereabouts. You couldn't get anybody at American to tell you anything. Right. So they did some serious detective work. And then I decided, I've got to tell this story.
Sure.
So I talked to them and asked their permission, because I didn't have to, but I wanted to.
Sure.
And the Boston Sunday Globe magazine bought it. It was the very first thing I wrote.
Wow.
And they paid me handsomely, and I about fainted. And I sent it to a classmate of mine who worked at the Globe, who wrote at the Globe. And I said, would you do me a favor, read it. If it's junk, throw it in the wastebasket and call me and tell me. He said, sure. I said, if it has any merit at all, would you pass it on to the magazine? So I guess he did. He never called me. A month later, the phone rang, and she introduced herself as the editor of the magazine. And we want to publish this in me.
Wow.
Wow. So that was really the beginning. And then Yankee Magazine took an article that year. Washington Post took a big feature that year about my son at the Naval Academy. And it had great guns. I was really interested in pursuing it, and I thought, great fun. And then my husband got cancer.
Yeah.
And everything came to a screeching halt. So,
Then to pick that up after that, transition in your life, and to really kind of float into the world of humor, of which this book is replete, among other things. Was that hard? I mean, that's a transition from human interest story, the one where, by the way, all the people in the audience here are using Kleenex, and they're getting through that.
I'm sorry.
And, but to what you were really an Irma Bombeck-ish person here.
Well, I mean, I was when I flew. I was always on this side of trouble, because, whatever. No, that comes sort of naturally. I mean, I never enter in the humor side of it, though. I've entered 10 times. It's every other year. But the humor writers are so funny. I don't hold a candle to them. I wouldn't presume to write and try that. But I could write a story, well, with the lump in the throat occasionally, pretty well.
Well, you've done that very well. And we're going to go into overtime here. Just want you to know this because this is so good. I asked Marcy ahead of time because this is purely personal, because she's also a baseball fan. I mean, look at the cover. Look at the cover. I mean, that's third base, man. She's rounding third, hence the name. But she's got an article here which hits home of Jamestown's Dietrich Park. Would you be willing to read that for us?
Sure.
I'm glad she said yes. That would be embarrassing for me. Here we go.
Okay. I wrote this in August of 2012. It was a very warm Monday night in July when they took me out to the old ball game. My daughter Alex, Ian, and their children indulged me in one of my favorite pastimes. We shared our evening at Dietrich Park in Jamestown, New York, home of the Jamestown Jammers, a Class A affiliate of the Miami Marlins. It was my first Jammers game. In my baseball-loving lifetime, I had seen only a few American League games in person. Grown-up baseball, and one AAA night game. I honestly didn't know what to expect from this minor league team, but I was thrilled to be seeing the game with Rory, age 7, and her little brother, Malcolm, at 4. I was looking forward to seeing the action through their eyes. We parked free on the grass near the small stadium. I couldn't help but think of the parking fees at Fenway in Boston. I could tell, as the other folks pulled out their seat cushions and coolers, that these were true fans. A lot of devoted old guys, teenagers, and young families, most of whom wore their Jammers ball caps. I never thought about what the name Jammers meant until I noticed up close that the logo was a bunch of Concord grapes, the kind you make jam from, the variety grown on tens of thousands of acres in western New York and Pennsylvania. The Jammers didn't sound like tough enough opponents for the Batavia Muck Dogs or the State College Spikes. But fortunately, the game that night was against the Auburn Doubledays. I guess Abner would have been proud. The Jammers play a short season in the New York Penn League, the team being an interesting mix of college players and minor league wannabes, some of them on the way up and a few on their way down. That night, the Jammers stood in last place in their division, but none of these minor league statistics lessened the major league enthusiasm of the arriving fans. I smiled seeing the little kids wearing their baseball gloves, remembering my own early days in the outfield. We stopped at the concession stand to stake out the menu. Ian bought 3 cold beers for us and purple cotton candy, grape-colored, for the kids. With these appetizers in hand, we postponed the hot dogs until the 3rd inning. This was a summer vacation, one of the rare times these grandchildren would be indulged junk food. Thank God they don't serve broccoli at the Jammers games. Our seats were right behind home plate. Malcolm sat next to me while Rory on his left sat by her dad, who fielded most of her questions. When we stood for the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner, Malcolm stared up at me, noticed, and then slowly raised his right hand to cover his heart. Smiling to myself, I thought, this is going to be fun. And then the questions began. Why is he throwing the ball like that? Why does his leg go up in the air? How does he know when to swing? What's his name? Gogo found it in the program. After the strike from the ump. What did he say? What's a strike? With his fingers enmeshed in the chicken wire, he asked me why we were sitting behind a fence, just before a wild pitch slammed into the fence directly in front of his face. His eyes grew big as saucers. That wasn't a strike, Gogo. There weren't too many hits. It was more of a pitcher's duel, but the pop flies and foul balls kept them interested. They saw a few stolen bases and some throwouts at third, enough to keep the questions and comments coming. His pants are dirty now, following a slide for home, right in front of us. That player's pants didn't hold a candle to the mustard and ketchup on Malcolm's shirt after the third inning, lemonade, fries, and hot dogs. May I have some more lemonade, please? The Jammers organization holds quick little games with prizes for kids between the innings, something we didn't know about until it was too late to register. Next year we'll know better. There were a few hurt feelings over the missed opportunity until the mascot, Bubba, and his sidekick, the chicken, came over to lead our kids in the chicken dance. Bubba is a purple monkey, which again, I didn't get until I heard his full name, Bubba, the grape ape. Duh. Why do they call him Bubba, Gogo? The lights came on in the huge light towers at 8 o'clock, and the organ played "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow." At the bottom of the fifth, the grounds crew came out to rake the infield. What are they doing, Gogo? He watched me sing along to take me out to the ball game, probably amazed that his Gogo, the old fossil, knew the words. The traditional seventh inning stretch took place during the eighth inning for some reason, but the organ played Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline, just like at Fenway. Who is Caroline, Gogo? Trailing 2-1, entering the bottom of the ninth, Bubba and the chicken led a hand-clapping rally that was fun, but alas, too little, too late. A stop in the gift shop outfitted the two new Jammers fans with ball caps before their tired walk to the parking area. Back home, Dad carried Malcolm up to bed while Rory climbed in with me. We had no trouble falling asleep. I dreamt that night of playing ball in my old backyard. The kids with the baseball gloves were the gang from my childhood, except for one little blond boy not from the neighborhood. They called him Malcolm, and he never caught one ball. He just stood near home plate, asking a lot of questions, while purple monkeys and chickens danced in the outfield. Maybe I should switch from Michelob to lemonade.
Fantastic. Thank you. That'll get a special mark. That is great. Thank you. You are a real, I use the term force of nature, but, a real value to this community in so many ways.
Thank you.
Well, it's so
Thank you.
And I got to conclude by what is on the back cover, because it captures it. Marcy O'Brien's writing is a gift to us all. It's homespun with more than a pinch of sophistication and a whole lot of heart. She has the charm of Garrison Keillor, the wit of Noel Coward, and the humanity of Joyce Carol Oates. Once you read one story and rounding third, which we just did, you won't want to put it down. That's how I felt reading this whole thing. So,
You did? You read it all?
yes, I did.
The person who wrote that, I met through the theater, Luke Yankee. His mother, oh gosh, what was her name? Was a very famous actress, and he was a director at the theater. And I got to know him, and he used to stay at my house when he came.
Oh, really?
And he's out on the West Coast doing that right now.
He's a playwright for Marilyn, Mom, and Me.
Eileen Heckert.
Okay.
That was his mom, right?
So you knew you were coming here tonight.
Yeah.
Is there a question that I should have asked Marcy O'Brien that you were expecting to be asked and haven't?
Well, thank God you didn't ask me what I weighed. Not really. I've been absolutely thrilled with the response. And I realized I've been to all the libraries in Warren County with the book. And there were 5, and it was well received, and I was pleased. There's 34 libraries in Chautauqua County.
Wow.
And I've only just scratched the surface. And I'm looking forward to summer maybe up at Chautauqua with some opportunities, I hope. I guess I just feel so lucky to have survived. COVID was a real thing for me. That's what all this breathing and mess is about. And realize that life has second acts and third acts and fifth acts and so forth. That I get annoyed with some older people who just pull it in and say, you know, oh, I'm not going to do that. I got to drive to Dayton to get this award, so, you know, yeah, that's what you do. You get in the car and you go. But my mother was that way. She was a force of nature. And just to conclude on one thing, where that comes from, because I'm stuck with her up here. She used to drive, she loved California, but she only had 2 weeks vacation. So she'd get in the car on Cape Cod on a Friday afternoon, right after work, and drive to Los Angeles in 2.5 days. She'd drive to Tulsa and have one Manhattan, a prime rib dinner, a tub bath, sleep 8 hours, get up and drive to LA. And she'd get there Monday morning to start the first week of vacation. And then she'd do the reverse coming back. And she did that more than a handful of times. I mean, how do you have that in front of you and not want to embrace life and do everything you can?
Well,
you know? So I've been very, very blessed, Greg. And I'm really, really grateful for that.
well, we're blessed and especially grateful to have you here today, and you will not have to go to the concession stand at Dietrich Park to put on a hat, because we're going to have you wear one here in a second. And most important, we'll be watching with interest the reports from Betsy Bombeck, daughter of Bill and Irma Bombeck, will be the keynote speaker at the Irma Bombeck Celebration Evening, Wednesday, April 3rd, where you will receive your award and will be reading.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcy O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.